Hey everyone, Erin Zenwara here. I think that's working. My light's just a bit bright. I'm just going to adjust that because I'm blaring it myself. Turn that down. Touch. Clever, clever what you can do from your phone these days. I feel like such an old person saying that sometimes. But so why are we here? The main reason we're here today is I put a post on my Instagram. If you don't follow me there, please do. If you're catching this video and you like it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I put up a post the other day and one of my clients posted it to me. She's like, "Oh my God, you were super loud." And my post was like, "Stop telling me you don't have an ego." And it's really, I've sort of kind of been thinking about this quite a bit this week and just came to that point where I was like, we all have to have a bit of a discussion about this thing where every now and again, if I mention someone, oh, it's your ego doing that, people get super defensive about it. And after I put up that post, someone messaged me and went, "Oh yeah, it's the height of egotisticalness to claim you don't have an ego." And I'm like, well, it is, but the problem with the word ego and the problem with the word egotistical and the problem with the word meditation and the problem with being in anything is we attach so much to these words. We attach our ego into them. And so then when someone says to us, "Oh, you're a yogi," there's this whole thing that goes with it, or "You're a meditator," or "I do meditation." We attach so much into it because actually the way we're constantly interacting is somewhat unconscious. And so we're unaware of the amount of weight, definition, personality projection that goes into all of that. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't have an ego," I really want you to stop, because there isn't a person alive who doesn't have an ego. And I think we have to be careful here because we need a definition for the word ego, or we need to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. And I think that's where it falls apart. A lot of people see ego as bad. And we have this concept of good or bad. So anything that's bad, we disassociate from. Anything that's good, we want to be, of course, because when we're good, we're closer to God. And whatever way you see godliness or being close to God is, we very much have this Christian archetype of a good person goes to heaven and a bad person goes to hell. Well, the truth is, we're all good and we're all bad. We all have those elements. But again, we attach so much into those words that we get this rise up of what Gangaji would refer to as the ego, and the super ego is like this idea of kind of like the crescendo, the high of feeling good and being great, and like that rise of the ego and everything is great. And then you've got the flagellation of the ego where you're a bad person and you didn't do well and you have to do better. And there's either the reward or the punishment. And these two things that come from being good or bad are, it's all a function of the ego, and our judgment of that. So how do we actually come across the death of the ego? Well, that in and of itself is even a strange term. And so we get caught back up on linguistics, and this is where it's all problematic, because some of you are arguing about shit and agreeing. And I find that super funny when I get into a discussion with someone and they're like, "You just want to argue with me." And I'm like, I actually think I'm agreeing with you. You just, like, we need to define the definition here. If you listen to Joe Dispenza talk about the ego, he talks about how the ego is what keeps us alive. So your basic function that gets you up and gets you moving in the morning is somewhat connected to survival. And survival, when everything is in balance, is your ego. Like your ego protecting you, your ego keeping you safe from falling off the edge of the cliff, your ego making sure that, yes, you're going to need food at some point, and that you're going to need warmth, and you're going to just, that it takes care of the body. What happens when the ego gets out of balance, and this is where we also start to become diseased, and I'll explain that more in a minute. But what happens when the ego gets out of balance is, or the being gets out of balance, is the ego takes over and it starts running the show all the time. So then what the ego is doing is, I need to protect myself all the time. Now, why would this happen? Through stress, through trauma, through very much early childhood trauma, we start to build up patterns. We also have a world around us that projects an idea, a program of what is good and bad and acceptable and functional and dysfunctional. So instead of us intuitively judging that for ourselves, we measure ourselves against the average man. We call it, it's a legal term, the average man, basically, or I forget exactly what they say, something like the measure of the average man. But this idea that there's this sort of mid-road person that you would measure yourself against, and yet none of us are mid-road, none of us are average. So we get very caught in this idea of where we should be compared to what we've been told or what we've been programmed to do. So it's considered okay to get up in the morning, brush your teeth, go to work, come home, eat some food, watch some TV, go to bed, get back up again the next day and do the same thing, and do that every day until you retire. And then you establish a retirement pattern, which is somewhat like your work life pattern, and you do that every day until you retire. And so, also, what's the problem with that is there's nothing to shock you out of and make you aware of something fresh or new. Like, in order to inspire the body, you have to shock the system somewhat. That's why cold water therapy is actually, and ice therapy is so beneficial. It's not just because it stimulates the vagus nerve, it's because it shocks you, and it shocks you into this moment. And that is meditation. It's being right here. Well, you can do it by sitting, cross-legged on your bed. You can do it dancing and then sitting, which we did on the weekend. And you can do it by jumping in ice water and then getting out and going, oh, I'm right here now. And I tell you what, when you get in that ice water and you jump out, you're suddenly aware of everything that's in this moment. And you're no longer thinking about whether you need food right now or whether you remembered to answer that email, that, like, you're no longer in that. You're just right here going, I'm cold, and I can feel everything in my body, and I can hear everything around me because everything is heightened. But we shouldn't have to do that to break our program. It's a good technique, don't get me wrong. We should also be able to break our program by starting to recognize what we're doing to keep ourselves in it. And this is where we come back to this kind of idea of us constantly being in an ego state due to being in a constant stress state, because we are unconsciously moving through our lives because we've built up patterns and we're doing the same thing all the time. And we've actually created a very protected world around ourselves because we're constantly doing the same thing. And by constantly doing the same thing, we're safe because we know how that works and we know what we're meant to be doing there. And so then while we're in that, all those little defense mechanisms that we need to protect us from being in love and getting hurt or being rejected or not feeling safe, we start to use those to protect ourselves even more. And so now when someone comes to us and they go, oh, I didn't really like it when you did that, we get very, very defensive. Now, defense is a function of the ego because, as we established before, ego is what protects us, right? So when everything is in balance, it stops us from walking too close to the edge of the cliff. It stops us from letting ourselves freeze to death at night because we have a desire to survive. When ego is running the show, it's because we're so much in a state of thinking we're running from a tiger that we're often not nice. And we often are bad, as we were using it before. And then we don't want to be that, of course, because we all want to go to heaven on whatever aspect or perspective or plane you understand heaven to be. We all want to be good. We all want to be close to God. So then we act in denial. And that also, that defense, that denial is again a function of the ego. So when people say to me, I have no ego, what we have is like basically supercharged egotism coming forward because this person is highly defensive. They're not even willing to accept that there are times when that there are even times when they act in defense of themselves, and they're doing it in this very moment. When you do this and someone is trying to work with you who's a holistic practitioner or whatever it is, and I do it myself, so this is definitely not a judgment. There are definitely times that it comes up for me where I defend myself in some way, and I can hear it and I can see myself doing it, and I'm thinking, just stop. Just stop. Slow down. Let the person say whatever they're saying. If it's true, take it in and it will become relevant. If it's not true, you take it in, it will never be relevant. Who cares? Right? Take it in and watch. Be the watcher. So the next time you're catching yourself in that defense mechanism, at least note it. At least note that you're the one who's defensive, that your ego is doing something there, and there's something to be learned in that moment. That's actually what's truly valuable about catching yourself defending yourself, is that you're doing it for a reason. Now, for those of you who are in a traumatic situation or in a situation of abuse, and this is not my area of expertise at all, so I'm going to touch on it and then say always ask for outside help, always use therapy modalities, use the systems that are set in place, use your friends as well here, and friends who don't judge you for making decisions that we often make when we're in a traumatized situation. It's very hard to act and really use your brain and use your conscious awareness when you're also trying to keep yourself safe. So for those of you who are in that situation where you are in fight or flight right now for a very justified reason, that's okay. And that's normal. It's very normal. However, you can be in the same situation and still be the person that steps back so that you can actually start to access your brain in a different way. Because when we're in fight or flight, our brain doesn't function right? Because we're all geared to run from the tiger. So there is an opportunity there, even in that horrendous moment, and I've been there too, to actually take a step back, to breathe out, to realize that the danger that you feel that you're in is no more dangerous with your brain functioning than it is with this heightened traumatic fight or flight response kind of thing going on. And it may give you the opportunity to get out as well. So with regards to all of this and this sort of tendency to defend and to defend ourselves and to protect ourselves, the question you should be asking yourself is, what are you defending? If you are whole, there is nothing to defend, because we're all good and bad, but these are sort of concepts really. And yes, they have ramifications in real time, but when we're sitting, in our own space, they're just a memory of what we did yesterday. Really, we have an opportunity to step forward with a different foot tomorrow. Are we still going to do things that are good or bad? Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, we're more likely to do those things when we're in that heightened defense mode, because we're no longer thinking about the other. We're thinking about what we can get from the situation or what we can get away from in that situation. So, yeah, it's a somewhat complicated, it seems like a complicated concept, but basically what I'm saying is, when you're in fight or flight, the brain doesn't work because you're trying to defend yourself. And because of the way our society is set up, we are in a constant state of fight or flight freeze. Because we're in that, and this is where we get into the health situation, because we're in that, our brains aren't taking that conscious awareness. We're not taking that conscious awareness step because we can't. So we use our meditation as medication so that we can take that step back and calm down the system, tap into our autonomic, our parasympathetic, and actually come into rest instead of fight or flight. And then we can use our brain. And then, as Joe Dispenza would say, and then creativity has an opportunity to take over. And then we have an opportunity to start firing these systems of the tantric system so that we can energize our bodies and we can step into a whole new space and we can actually be in a state of, I guess, what people call ego death. Ego death doesn't really exist, because you're always going to have an ego. It's by definition, it's part of what is protecting you, and it is somewhat necessary. You just don't want it running your show. Um, and even when my fight or flight flares up, I want to be aware of that because I also want to be questioning, did it need to react in that moment? Did I need to be running from the tiger in that moment? Or actually, can I start calming myself? Can I start rewiring that pattern? You know? Um, and please don't feel guilty for defending yourself. That's the superego like whipping you for doing the wrong thing. And it's counterintuitive. So we get defensive, big whoop. Try not to be defensive in the moment, get defensive again, big whoop. Try again. And keep trying, and keep working with that. Till eventually you don't have to try anymore. Or you stop judging yourself for the reactions that you have and you just keep learning and working with it, which is pretty much what we're always going to have to be doing because there's always going to be something that is testing us. That's the way life seems to be. But this state of fight or flight keeps us in a cortisol stimulated state. For those of us that are have gone so far down that cortisol stimulation state that actually it down regulates, and then we have abnormally low levels of cortisol, that's where we start to see the disease really kicking in. So when you're in that really heightened cortisol state, what we end up with is adrenal fatigue, kind of, or what they're calling adrenal fatigue situations. We get sort of pre-symptoms, stomach problems, other fatigue problems. We get pre-symptoms of chronic disease, and then we start to flip into being so overstimulated that now we're getting weird cortisol levels, and the system is actually down regulating, and you start dying. And to say start dying is also wrong. But you start, because we're living and dying at the same time anyway. But you start dying on a exacerbated level. And so, in order to get well from disease truly, and this is whether you go Western medicine or not, this is whether you go Eastern medicine or not, there is a massive component that you must understand, and that is, in order to be in rest and recovery, in order for my body to heal, I cannot be stressed out. And I don't even need to explain the chemical science of how these two, stress and recovery, share the same bonder. Or that when we go into that like low cortisol state where we don't even have optimal levels of cortisol anymore, over elevated levels of cortisol anymore, how that dysfunction in the hormonal endocrine system has a knock-on effect to all the centers that create hormones that run your system. Just going back to, if I'm constantly stressed, if I'm constantly running from something or trying to do something or desperately trying to keep myself safe, protect myself, justify my existence, defend myself, etc., 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 train super hard so that I have the perfect body and cause a whole lot of cortisol there on top of everything else that's going on as well. So you've got to be careful of that one. How on earth can I rest and recover? People think, well, I go to sleep at night. It's like, do you? Do you really rest? There are times in my life when I have woken up and I can feel the elevation of my heart. I measure it, in fact, and I can see the elevation of my heart at certain times. Certain types of training will elevate it when I sleep because my body has gone into recovery, but it's still trying to recover. So it never drops to its optimal low. With regards to different stories I've told myself, and as I've started to peel back the layers and the layers of my conscious awareness, I've started to realize that there are stories I have told myself because I was afraid that it was all going to fall apart. And so I told myself that I have to keep going to keep it together. And it's like, actually, there are many times when I have had no choice but to fall apart, when I couldn't just keep going. And nothing fell apart. I'm still here. Everything's still functioning on some level. There's still joy and love to be had in my life. There's still people here. There's still Everything is still happening. I'm still alive, you know? So it's an interesting thing that as many times as our lives do have moments where they fall apart, we fail to trust in the fact that somehow there's always momentum there. Until you die, there's always going to be momentum there, unless you really give up. The more you trust, the more you move into the awareness of watching all the energies that are moving around you, the more you'll realize that there is plenty. And the more you'll realize that you're not doing it all, you're part of something. If you want to get well, start questioning your defense mechanism. Start questioning you saying you know something. Do you? The more I talk about this, the more I'm like, I don't know shit. The more I investigate, I'm like, the more I look at my ego, I'm like, wow, I never realized that before. The more I discover my layers of defense, the more I'm blown away by the fact that enlightenment is a journey. It's not a destination. And we have this idea in our ego that it's a destination. And when we hit enlightenment, everything will be okay. It's like, talk to the gurus out there, talk to the people that have hundreds of thousands of followers. They're not living a life of no problems. That's not life. They're living a life of bliss within the problems. You want to be the calm within the storm. Because when you're there, you can use your brain. And it's so much easier. When you're there, you can rest even at the worst moments. And then you will still have your health and you'll still have your energy. And it's simple. Someone with energy, how much more likely are they to create something? Joe Dispenza puts this really well, actually. He says, you cannot create in a state of fight or flight. You can't create in a state of stress. It's obvious. You also can't be in a state of bliss in a state of stress. That's also obvious. I think the question that I want to take away with me, and I guess I want to leave you with, is what are you defending? Yeah, what are you defending? Have a great day. Like and subscribe, send me requests, follow me on Facebook and Instagram and all those sort of things. I will be tuning in again this week. I've got something else to talk about that's post having COVID and just the recovery process in that. So that'll be the next video up. Do check into some of my other stuff. I'm starting to do more dance stuff, and I do dance stuff online for free and dance and yoga stuff online for free. If you want to be part of that, you need to private message me in order for me to add you in on Facebook to the chat group that we have for that. What else is there? You can also follow my cat, Thomas_the Berman, on Instagram. He's a real cutie, but I do post him in my stories as well. And what else was there to say? Dance Like No One's Watching, my little project, is becoming a bigger project. And not only is it starting to move out in workshops around the countryside in New Zealand, but I'm looking to take that internationally as well. So if you want to be part of that and you want to know more about what I'm getting up to, again, private message me or give me a hands up and I'll add you to the mailing list. I need to get a whole subscription base set up for that. I do believe if you go to erinpolashek.com, so www.erinpolashek, POLASCHEK.com, you can actually sign up to my mailing list there as well, which I must check into how that's working. It's all new. So anyway, thank you. Comment, like, subscribe, all the rest. And I'd love to see a conversation or have a conversation with someone about what they defended today and how they got to chuckle about it. Have a great day.